So far, we've named this version of the calculator, we've filled in our basic information, our row lengths, some information about our cold weather crops and about our hot weather crops. Next, let's scroll down and talk about plant spacing. These default plant spacing values are based on average biointensive plant spacing guidelines for crops planted in wide raised beds. Since these fields are input fields, it is possible to change the default values to suit your planting methods. Just be aware that if you do not plant as densely as indicated by these default values, your actual yields may be somewhat lower than predicted by this calculator. Now these output values have been generated by the calculator based on the information that we've input in the basic information section and in the cold weather crop input section. The first column shows how much of each crop we are going to plant over the entire season. The second column shows how much we will plant each week for the harvest successions that we filled in the input section above. So for our beets, we will be planting 5 row feet per week for 3 weeks, bi-weekly for harvest in the early part of the season, and 5 row feet for 2 weeks, weekly, in the later part of the season, beginning on July 15th. Now let's talk about dates. We can scroll down to the cold weather crop planting and harvest dates section to view more outputs generated by the calculator. While the previous section generated information about how much you will be planting, this section generates information on when you will be planting and on when you are likely to harvest. So for our beets, we will begin planting in the early part of the season on April 6th, and we will plant for 3 weeks bi-weekly. Likewise, in the later part of the season, we will begin planting our beets on July 15th, and we will plant them for 2 weeks, weekly. Now let's return to the question of how much space we've used. Before, we reduced the amount of beets and beans we would sell so that we did not use more space than we had. But we can also save space by double planting through companion planting, or what is called intercropping. Now let's say we want to grow lettuce, and we are going to give each of our 10 people 1 pound of lettuce per week. And we are going to sell 5 pounds per week. Let's say we are going to harvest it for 3 weeks, weekly, in the early part of the season, and for 3 weeks, weekly, in the later part of the season. We'll plant the later season succession in the middle of July. Now since we have several different varieties of lettuce that we are going to plant, we are going to average the maturation times between the different varieties. Some of our varieties are mature in 45 days and others in 35 days. So we are going to input 40 for the average maturation time of all the varieties that we are going to plant. Let's update the calculator to see how much space we've used. Oops, we've used more space than we have. Since garlic and lettuce can be companion planted, let's intercrop the locations where they will be planted. We will be planting 16 row feet of garlic and 22 row feet of lettuce. Let's plant 16 feet of the total amount of lettuce in the same location as our garlic. So we'll scroll up to the notes field and type in intercropping, lettuce with garlic, 16 feet. Now we'll go down to the intercropping field and we'll input 16 feet and update the calculator. Great, we've saved 16 row feet of space, and we now have 11 row feet of planting space left. The calculator also automatically accounts for additional planting space from succession planting, so that you can get the most out of your planting area. Here the calculator has saved 22 row feet, assuming that we will double plant our later season successions in the same location that we planted our early season successions. So for our beets, we will be planting our later season successions in the same location that we planted our early season successions after those successions have been harvested. We don't have to wait until the final harvest of the early season successions. We could begin planting later season successions once these initial successions have been completely harvested. Now, hot weather crops are much less complex. Except for the beans, there is no succession planting, so we will be planting the total feet needed all at once, and we will do so on our first and only planting date. For the beans, of course, we will succession plant every 2 or 3 weeks. For example, let's say we will plant 4 successions, and we will do so every 2 weeks. So we will plant 25 row feet of beans every 2 weeks until we have planted 4 successions and a total of 100 row feet. Let's go ahead and make a note about this in our notes field. So we'll type beans, 4 successions, biweekly. And we'll save the calculator. So we'll click on Save My Calculator, and we'll scroll down and reopen Demo so that we can continue to work on it. So we've reviewed information generated by the calculator on planting and harvest of cold weather crops and of hot weather crops. The next section of the calculator generates information on the amount of seed we will need to meet our harvest goals. These amounts are given in approximate number of seeds, in approximate number of grams, and approximate number of ounces. Finally, for those using the farm version of the calculator, let's look at the retail sales section. For this section, all you need to do is fill in the price per pound that you will be selling your produce for. Let's say that we will sell our beets for $2.50 a pound, our garlic for $6 a pound, and our beans for $5 a pound. Now we'll just scroll down and click the Update tab. The calculator generates the projected amount of income per crop per week, per crop per season, and for all crops over the entire season. Now let's scroll up to the top and save our calculator. This video has provided basic information about filling in and using the Fantastic Farm and Garden Calculator. Please check back to view the next edition where I will discuss using these templates to track planting and harvesting at your garden or farm.